This is our 55th sermon in this sermon series as we've looked at Mark's Gospel entitled Jesus Unique. And it's the final one. Now, I know that Mark's Gospel goes on to verse 20, but most scholars think that it ends here at Mark chapter 16, verse 8, and that verses 9 to 20 were added sometime later by another author that wanted to tidy up Mark's Gospel, because Mark leaves us hanging, just like this image does, cut between two pieces of the story. 55 sermons over 4 years. It's been a long time. But I hope you've enjoyed it and been challenged and encouraged by it as much as I have. I spent about 4 years when I was at my last church in Sevenoaks, a long time, over 55 sessions, an adult education creative writing course. And in those 4 years, I learned one thing. And our teacher said to us, if you want to have a good novel, something that will fly off the shelves, you need 3 Ps. You need plot, you need place, and you need people. If you have those 3 and they sing, then your story will engage people. And I would suggest that Mark's Gospel has plot, place, and people. What's the plot of this story? We see it on the lips of the angel. Jesus the Nazarene, who was crucified, he has risen. These are the words that the angel says to the women. The 3 women had got up early in the morning to go to Jesus. The Sabbath would have finished at 6 p.m. on the Saturday. I imagine they fidgeted and they fussed as it got dark and cold, wondered what can we do, and then thought we'll get some spices and we'll go and anoint the body. And it says very early in the morning they got up and went to the tomb, probably as soon as it was light. Easter Sunday last year, I can tell you exactly when it was light, because I was down at the recreation ground as a helicopter took my dad's dying body to King's College Hospital in London. And that was at about 5:21 in the morning as the sun began to rise and the helicopter had taken off. It was still cold and it was still damp, and it was probably the same for these ladies. They hadn't really thought it through, had they? Because they go into a tomb where the stone had been rolled down over a gentle decline of a slope in a slot, and it would have taken at least 6 men probably to take that out of there. 3 women, 3 men wouldn't have been able to do it. But when you're in grief, sometimes you just want to do things, don't you? You want to make a small difference, and these women, they wanted to do that. But they get to the tomb and they find the angel who tells them, Jesus the Nazarene. He's very understated, isn't he? Could have said, the Son of God or Creator. But he says Jesus the Nazarene, where Jesus had grown up, his roots. Who was crucified. He's making it really clear here. Jesus definitely died on a cross. He has risen. He's alive again. That's the plot. The place, he says, go back to Galilee. That's where Jesus is going to meet you. Galilee was nicknamed Galilee of the Nations because around the Lake of Galilee there were 4 sides, and on the northern side you had Jewish people lived there, and then the other 3 sides of the Lake of Galilee was pretty much Gentiles, non-Jewish people like me, probably like you. And so the Jewish people in Galilee weren't that strict in their religious observances because they were so intermingled with people who didn't worship God and didn't follow the Jewish culture. They were looked down upon. They were 60, 70 miles away from Jerusalem, and it was a backwater area. The people's language, their accent was so thick, it would be like a Newcastle accent for somebody like me who lives in the Garden of England. Genuinely hard to understand. They weren't in Jerusalem, in the cut and thrust of things. They were in this backwater area. And Jesus tells them to go back to Galilee. Why? I think because it's understated, it's unglamorous, but also because this is where it started for the disciples. Go back and live out your everyday life in the knowledge that I, Jesus, am alive and amongst you. Plot, place, and then people. The people, we have 3 women. It's interesting, isn't it, that the women are the first witnesses to Jesus' resurrection. in Jesus' day, a woman's witness statement was not valid in a court of law. Sorry, you're a woman, not hearing it. I mean, that is horrendous, isn't it? But this was 2,000 years ago. Why does God go to them first? It's such an understated way to do it. Wouldn't you have gone with tracts being given out, some kind of website design, angels in the sky? No, 3 women. They're the first to hear that Jesus is risen. And the angel says, tell the disciples and Peter to go back to Galilee. I love those 2 words, and Peter. Because Peter had been the one that had made great claims and magnificent statements of how he would never leave Jesus. He'd screwed up the most, even more than you. Yep, you. You who are sitting there right now thinking, but I'm so far from God. I've just turned into God because the world seems to be falling apart. I feel such a fake. Peter screwed up more than you. And I love it that there's room for Peter. And there's room for the other disciples who ran away. And there's room for you. And there's room for me. Tell the disciples and Peter to go back, because they're going to start speaking to the crowds. The gospel writers could have used many Greek words for the English word crowd that we have. And the word they all plumped for, and the word that Mark uses 30 times in his gospels, is the Greek word oklos. And it basically means those who are ceremonially unclean, who are in the lower classes, who are academically challenged, those who don't fit in with the Jewish religious culture. They were the people that after there'd been a battle would go along and pick through the carcasses of the dead bodies to find any gold or swords that weren't broken or shields that could be used. In the time of the prophet Ezra in the Old Testament, they were used for those who were literally the bottom of the rungs, the lowest of the low. And Mark deliberately uses this word to describe the people that went in their thousands to Jesus. Friends, if we don't find the oklos in our churches, we will not fully experience the presence of the risen Jesus. And before you start thinking about who the oklos are in TBC, it's you and it's me. Because none of us have got it that together that we can't turn to Jesus and say, hey, Jesus, I don't really need that whole cross thing, you dying in my place, because I'm kind of almost there already. No. We all need Jesus. We're all at the bottom of the pile when it comes to where we stand with God. And thank God that he includes us all, even if we have a thick Newcastle accent that no one can understand. About 6 weeks ago, it seems like another age now, my son Noah, who's 14, and I went to watch Arsenal versus Newcastle. Arsenal obviously won. We won 4-0. And afterwards, we went and queued up for the tube at Arsenal tube station. It takes about half an hour to queue up there, and you queue up from one of either ends, and there's gates that make sure you can't jump in the queue. And when we got onto the tube and we were on there, and we were all squashed in like this, really pack you in, they do, like a Japanese train, if you've ever seen those on YouTube. There were these 2 Newcastle fans stood next to me about my age, and one of them said to the other, and it was a Sunday, this game, he said, we're definitely going to hell now. And he said it quite loudly, and then I kind of looked at him and went, well, why are you going to hell? He went, well, and he told me this story. Now, what you need to understand is that you queue up to go in half an hour either side. But at the middle, where you begin to go into the tube station, there's a gate. And if you have a small child or somebody who physically is struggling or a senior with you, you can go to that bit and you can ask and they will let you in. And these 2 Newcastle fans were walking past this bit. They didn't know it was there. They were going to go all the way round. And when they saw it, one of the guys said, excuse me, my friend's partially sighted. And the other guy thought, I didn't know I was partially sighted, but I'll pretend I am now. And he was saying to the guy on the tube, you didn't give me a chance to get into the role. I didn't get into the role of being a partially sighted person. I just did it. And they said the woman on the gate opened up the gate for us and said, watch the curb, let them through, he's partially sighted. I said, so it works then? He went, oh yeah, it worked, but we're definitely going to hell. Now, if you are actually partially sighted, you may find that story offensive rather than humorous. But I share it because I think when it comes to the Easter story, we're all, spiritually speaking, partially sighted. None of us have it completely together. None of us know exactly what happened on that day 2,000 years ago. So my question is this: what do we know? Because we inhabit a mystery. We must not pretend to know too much, is what Eugene Peterson said. If he, who wrote the whole Bible again in the Message version, didn't know it all, how can we know it all? We are partially sighted. So what do we know? We know he is risen. Those that say to you, oh no, he didn't really die on the cross, he swooned. No, he died because when the spear went in his side, blood and water flowed separately. And that's what happens when you're dead, medical experts tell me. Oh, well, they hid the body after he was dead, some people say. Either the Roman leaders or the religious Jewish leaders or the disciples did it. If that happened, when they began to say that Jesus had risen from the dead, if you were the Romans or the Jewish religious leaders, wouldn't you have brought the body out and said, ha-ha, caught you? Or if you were the disciples, wouldn't you have, when you began to be being sawn in half or crucified upside down, surely one of them would have said in that last moment of death, actually, guys, confession time, kind of made it up. We hid the body because we wanted to keep the whole thing going. Jesus definitely died and Jesus definitely rose again. He didn't just rise in some poetic way. Oh, it was like a morning sunrise, and as that gives us hope, the poetic rising of Jesus from the dead gives us hope as well. He didn't just rise in his teachings. Oh, Socrates, although he's dead, his teachings kind of mean he lives on with us, and it's the same with Jesus. No, he didn't just rise morally either. Oh, the way the disciples were changed and the way the church has done so many good things morally, it's as if Jesus was alive amongst us. No, the central Christian belief, the central thing, the thing it all hangs on, the thing that Paul says we are fools and idiots if it's not true, is he is risen. Without that, there's no hope. We might as well turn this place into a bingo hall if he didn't rise from the dead in reality. Look at the disciples as one piece of evidence. Running away, scared stiff, on that night before Good Friday. And then they were transformed in those days they spent with Jesus after he rose from the dead and before he went back to heaven. They gave their all, their lives. Would they have done that if they hadn't really met the risen Jesus? I very much doubt it. And so Mark gives us this understated story. And I wonder, do we truly understand it? He gives us place. He gives us people. And he gives us a cliffhanger of a plot. At the end of verse 8, the women run away filled with trembling and bewilderment. We know that later on they tell people about Jesus and the Jesus movement, the way the church begins. But Mark leaves us on a cliffhanger in his understated way. And I think he's saying to us, do you understand this? How are you going to respond to this risen Jesus? Are you going to run away in fear and trembling? Or are you going to tell people about who he is and what he's done? Do you really understand it? Frederick Buechner is a Presbyterian minister in his 80s now, and he's also a novelist. And he says, the preceding year I had become a Christian, though the chances are I would have hesitated to put it like that. And I find something in that way of expressing it which even now makes me feel uncomfortable. To become a Christian sounds like an achievement, like becoming a millionaire. I thought of it rather, and think of it still, more as a lucky break, a step in the right direction. Though I was brought up in a family where church played virtually no role at all, through a series of events from childhood on, I was moved, for the most part without any inkling of it, closer and closer to a feeling for that mystery out of which the church arose in the first place, until finally the mystery itself came to have a face for me. And the face it came to have for me was the face of Christ. That's Jesus. It was a slow, obscure process which I tried to describe in the earlier book. And the result of it was that I ended up being so moved by what I felt that I found it inadequate simply to keep it inside myself like a secret, but had to do something about it. Frederick Buechner's following of Jesus was a long, subtle, winding journey, and maybe that's yours. Some of you, I think, watching right now are on that journey as we speak, and I would encourage you to take that step and follow Jesus. Or maybe our story is a bit more like Fred Craddock's dad. He was an old American preacher, died a few years back, little rotund chap with a bald head and glasses. And he says that he remembers as a child him going to church with his mum, and his dad wanted nothing of church. And whenever they had a guest preacher at their church, it was a tiny village church, his mum would always have them back for lunch, because she thought if her husband wouldn't go to church, then she'd bring church to him. And as they ate, which his dad liked to do, he'd make sure that he heard the gospel message. And after they'd eaten, the minister would begin to chat with Fred Craddock's dad. And Fred said his abiding memory of that was his mum in the kitchen washing and wiping up after dinner, sobbing into the washing up bowl because she could hear her husband talking to the guest preacher. And he would say things like, "You're not interested in me. You just want my name on the membership roll. You're not bothered about me. You just want my cash in your offering bags. You're not interested in me. It's just your job to talk to me about Jesus." Every time, Fred Craddock's dad was defiant. He said one time that changed. When Fred was an adult and his dad was in hospital, last stages of life, cancer. He shouldn't have smoked, they said. And he went in to see his father, tubes running in and out of his body as he laid on that deathbed. Oxygen mask on his face because he couldn't breathe without it. Couldn't speak. Fred came in and he asked that dumb question that we all ask. "How are you doing, Dad?" Dad looked at him and he got a Kleenex tissue box and he got a pen and he wrote a line from Shakespeare on it. It said this: "In this harsh world, draw your breath in pain to tell my story. In this harsh world, draw your breath in pain to tell my story." And Fred leant in and he asked his dad, "Dad, what's your story?" And he wrote 3 words on the box. I was wrong. I was wrong. And at that moment, he said yes to Jesus, and he followed him for his last brief moments on this planet. Maybe our following of Jesus has been more dramatic like that. It doesn't matter from an eternal perspective whether it was a winding journey or a dramatic one. What matters is, are we following the risen Jesus? The risen Jesus who will continue to transform our lives. The risen Jesus who said the lockdown of death on a cross will not be the final answer. I will overcome this crisis of sin and death, and I will triumph. Understated in Mark's Gospel, to be sure. I hope and pray that we all understand it. Let's pray together. I want to pray now with those who maybe think, I'd like to begin to follow Jesus. Please pray these words simply after me. Or maybe you follow Jesus already and you'd like them to be a recommitment of your life to him. Dear Jesus, I thank you for all you did for me, that you died in my place and you rose again and you washed away my sin. I am forgiven because you have arisen. Holy Spirit of God, please give me peace right now. Let me know that I am loved by you in a way no other could or has loved me. I commit my life to you, and I will trust you until the end. In your name, Jesus. Amen.